A guided democracy functions as a de facto autocracy. Such governments are legitimized by elections that are free and fair but do not change the state's policies, motives, and goals. In other words, the government controls elections so that the people can exercise all their rights without truly changing public policy. Under guided democracy, the state's continuous use of propaganda techniques prevents the electorate from having a significant impact on policy. The concept of a guided democracy was developed in the 20th century by Walter Lippmann in his seminal work Public Opinion, and by Edward Bernays in his work Crystallizing Public Opinion. Noam Chomsky in his book Media Control states there are two conceptions of democracy. One conception of democracy has it that a democratic society is one in which the public has the means to participate in some meaningful way in the management of their own affairs, and the means of information are open and free. An alternative conception of democracy is that the public must be barred from managing of their own affairs, and the means of information must be kept narrowly and rigidly controlled. That may sound like an odd conception of democracy, but it's important to understand that it is the prevailing conception. In society there are two roles to play with respect to democratic participation, and here I am using Walter Lippmann's terminology. The bewildered herd. The bewildered herd are the spectators. They may moan about the state of things a little, but their power to make a significant change is limited. The bewildered herd believes they live inside a democracy. Their function in a democracy, Lippmann writes, is to be spectators, not participants in action. But they have more of a function than that, because it's a democracy. Occasionally they are allowed to lend their weight to one or another member of the specialized class. In other words, they are allowed to say, "We want you to be our leader," or "We want you to be our leader." That's because it's a democracy, and not a totalitarian state. That's called an election. But once they've lent their weight to one or another member of the specialized class, they are supposed to sink back and become spectators of action, but not participants. That's in our current functioning democracy. The specialized class. These are the people who analyze, execute, make decisions, and run things in the political, economic, and ideological systems. The specialized class make up a small percentage of the population, and their biggest objective is to tame the bewildered herd by enforcing a guided democracy. I'm not arguing here that the specialized class are inherently evil or have some joy in domination over others. On the contrary, they genuinely believe, like all people, that they are doing good. The specialized class could argue that they are doing the right thing by protecting the stupid, bewildered herd from stampeding all over each other. According to Chomsky, the first successful propaganda campaign carried out by a modern government took place in the United States under the Woodrow Wilson administration. Wilson was the US president during the First World War. At that time, Chomsky argues, the population of the US were largely pacifists and wanted no involvement in a European war. However, Wilson's government established a propaganda campaign called the Creel Commission, which Chomsky argues, succeeded, within 6 months, in turning a pacifist population into a hysterical, warmongering population which wanted to destroy everything German, tear the Germans limb from limb, go to war and save the world. Control Tactic 1. Fear. Essentially, Wilson did this by terrifying the population. For example, there was a good deal of fabrication of atrocities by the Huns, Belgian babies with their arms torn off, all sorts of awful things that you still read in history books, and eliciting jingoist fanaticism. Or ever wonder why there is always an enemy? The Soviet Union, terrorism, and now Russia. Chomsky writes, you frighten the population, terrorize them, intimidate them so that they are too afraid to travel and cower in fear. Then you have a magnificent victory over Grenada, Panama, or some other defenseless third world army that you can pulverize before you ever bother to look at them, which is just what happened. That gives relief. We were saved at the last minute. That's one of the ways in which you can keep the bewildered herd from paying attention to what's really going on around them, keep them diverted and controlled. Another modern-day magnificent victory would be Iraq, for example. Did they have weapons of mass destruction? We were led by fear. Control tactic 2. Meaningless slogans. Another example would be the propaganda slogan. For example, support our troops. What does it mean if someone asks you, do you support our troops? It doesn't mean anything, and that is the point. Chomsky writes, the point of public relations slogans like the support our troops is that they don't mean anything. They mean as much as whether you support the people in Iowa. Of course, there was an issue. The issue was, do you support our policy? But you don't want people to think about that issue. That's the whole point of good propaganda. You want to create a slogan that nobody's going to be against, and everybody's going to be for. Nobody knows what it means, because it doesn't mean anything. Its crucial value is that it diverts your attention from a question that does mean something. Do you support our policy? That's the one you're not allowed to talk about. So you have people arguing about support for the troops. Of course I don't support them. Then you've won. Control tactic 3. Selective perception. With selective perception we consider one person or group to be a monster, but don't apply that same standard to others. Especially to our own group, political party, country, etc. This is also where the false left-right-wing paradigm of politics usually fits. In the UK, we have two main parties, Labour and Conservative. The two parties act to create divisiveness and influence the general population while keeping control of the political spectrum. When Labour last got in, what changed? What about when the Conservatives did? Did you notice a big shift in public policy? Former Council on Foreign Relations archivist and Georgetown University professor Carroll Quigley, who is known as being President Bill Clinton's mentor, wrote in his 1966 book, Tragedy and Hope, and I quote, "The argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one, perhaps, of the right, and the other of the left, is a foolish idea acceptable only to the doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical, so the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extreme shifts in policy." A good example would be Jeremy Corbyn. Leave aside what you think of his politics for a moment, but focus on the fact that like Trump he was anti-establishment. They were treated the same way, yet one is right-wing and the other is left. Both are considered evil by many in the media and mainstream parties. Corbyn would have led to a shift in policy. For example, he is anti-nuclear weapons and was calling out UK foreign policy. This labelled him anti-British in the press. Even if you disagree with him, the point is that anti-establishment politicians cannot be tolerated. Big shifts in policy will get you in trouble. The internet and social media have changed this, e.g. Trump, although Trump had the money to get publicity in the first place. Now we see the publicity on fake news taking off. This is just another way to control the political speech. Control tactic 4. Public education. The state education system is becoming more narrow in that its primary purpose is to train people to get a job. It's basically providing the corporations with the workforce it needs. I'm not saying that can't be part of what education does. Getting a job is important, but education should be much broader than that because people's lives are too. People are more than just their jobs. A democracy can only flourish if the citizens are well informed. This means they need to be able to put current affairs into context through knowledge of history, or to be able to answer questions like what is the role of the state via philosophy. They need the tools to think and understand logic and rhetoric. Sometimes we are presented with a false dilemma, like prepare students for work or college, as if they are the only options, and we debate which is best while missing out all the other important alternatives. That is state school. The private schools, for example Eton, are different. Their Greek, Latin and classical civilization are still taught along with music and drama. The students of Eton and other public schools are far more likely to make it to the specialized class. Not only through education, but also because of the contacts they make through that said education. The Mail Online actually tracked down what one class of Eton have gone on to achieve. For example, one student was David Cameron, ex-UK Prime Minister, another Roland Watson, political editor of The Times, and Andy Greenacre, picture editor, Saturday Telegraph magazine. Not all of them in that class had great careers, but this is just one class. Now compare that to your own class at school. How many of them have political influence? Now, this is not an complete list. These are just some examples of the techniques employed to guide democracy. The problem with the bewildered herd is that it can never truly be tamed, only contained. And so propaganda, the wick of the lion tamer, the bludgeon of the dictator, must be ever present. If you like this video, give a like and a subscribe. Thanks for watching.